Hey listeners, this is Mike Morford, the host of Killer Communications, and I want to invite you to check out a great podcast by my friend Robin Warder, who hosts The Trail Went Cold. Released in 2016, The Trail Went Cold is a weekly true crime podcast which explores unsolved mysteries and cold cases. On each episode, Robin examines a new unsolved murder or missing persons case, tackling a wide variety from different countries and time periods. After sharing all the details in each case, Robin offers his own personal analysis and theories about what happened. At the time of this recording, The Trail Went Cold has released over 460 episodes, and it's approaching the major milestone of its 10-year anniversary as a podcast, and some of the cold cases it has covered over the years have even been solved. The Trail Went Cold is one of my go-to podcasts, and I think you'll really enjoy it. If you're a fan of the original Unsolved Mysteries TV show, The Trail Went Cold is the podcast for you, as it covers many of the cases that were featured on the show, which are still unsolved to this day, and the podcast will sometimes share additional information which may cause you to look at the cases in a different light. One of these stories is the 1987 murders of 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Kevin Ives, more commonly known as the Boys on the Tracks case. This is one of the most controversial and convoluted cases you're ever going to find, and The Trail Went Cold provided extensive coverage about it on episodes 213 and 214. Here's a preview of that series.
Our story begins in Saline County, Arkansas in 1987. Our central figures are 16-year-old Don Henry and 17-year-old Larry Kevin Ives, who goes by the name Kevin. Don lives with his father and stepmother, Curtis and Marvell Henry, in Bryant, a suburb of Little Rock which has a population of around 5,000 people. Kevin resides in Benton, a larger Little Rock suburb, and lives with his parents Larry and Linda Ives. Even though Don and Kevin have only known each other for 6 months, they have become very close friends and are preparing for their senior year at Bryant High School. On Saturday, August the 22nd, the last weekend before school was scheduled to start, Don and Kevin met up with some friends and spent much of the evening hanging out in a commuter parking lot on the outskirts of Little Rock. The two boys eventually headed back to Don's mobile home, where Kevin told his parents he was planning to spend the night, and they arrived shortly after midnight on August the 23rd. While Kevin waited on the porch, Don went inside and told his father Curtis that he and Kevin were planning to go out hunting in the woods behind their residence, so he grabbed his .22 caliber rifle as well as a large flashlight. The two boys were likely going to engage in a form of night hunting called spotlighting, where Kevin would shine the flashlight directly into the eyes of an animal before Don fired his rifle at it, and while the practice was technically illegal in Arkansas, it was still a very widespread activity in the area. After Don left the mobile home, he and Kevin walked off into the woods, but sometime over the course of the next 4 hours, they would find themselves at the center of a bizarre unsolved mysteries. Later that morning, a 3-engine, 6,000-ton Union Pacific Railroad cargo train, which was 75 cars and 1 mile long, was traveling on its run from Texarkana to Little Rock. It passed by the town of Alexander and was traveling through a wooded area in Saline County, and the crew consisted of engineer Stephen Schroyer, conductor Jerry Tomlin, and brakeman Danny Delamar. At around 4:25 a.m., they had passed by a crossing at Chobe Road when the crew suddenly noticed what appeared to be 2 people lying on the tracks ahead of them. Even though they immediately hit the emergency brakes, the train was traveling at 52 miles per hour at this point, so there was no way it would be able to come to a complete stop before it reached the people on the tracks. Schroyer kept frantically sounding the diesel horn in order to warn them about the oncoming train, but said he never saw any movement or reaction. The train barreled right through the 2 people and wound up dragging them for a half mile before it finally came to a stop. The victims were horribly mangled, and their body parts spread across the area. After the Saline County Sheriff's Office were summoned to the scene, the victims were eventually identified as Don Henry and Kevin Ives. Ironically, Kevin's father, Larry Ives, was also employed as an engineer for Union Pacific Railroad and had traveled that same route for years before he was transferred and replaced by Stephen Schroyer 2 months before this incident. If this had not taken place, Larry could have been the engineer inside the locomotive when his son was killed. The location on the tracks where this incident took place was about a mile away from Don's mobile home. The train's crew members all maintained that before the locomotive ran over the two boys, they had both been lying parallel on the tracks in identical positions, with their arms straight down by their sides and legs over the rails. Don's .22 caliber hunting rifle and flashlight had also been lying on the gravel beside them before they were shattered into pieces. The crew had also reported seeing a light green tarp partially covering Don and Kevin's bodies, even though neither of the boys owned such a tarp. Jerry Tomlin would later claim that after the police arrived, he walked the tracks and discovered the tarp with his flashlight before he directed one of the deputies towards it. But curiously, the deputy later denied that this exchange ever took place, and since there was no official record of the tarp having been found, law enforcement would question its existence and even allege that the crew may have been experiencing a quote-unquote optical illusion when they originally saw it. However, Schroyer, Tomlin, and Delamar would all maintain that the tarp had been there. Indeed, there were a lot of questions about how the Saline County Sheriff's Office handled the investigation, as they failed to secure the scene and properly collect evidence. It seemed like they were content to treat the scene as an accident, or even an elaborate double suicide, rather than explore the possibility of foul play. In fact, the county sheriff, Jim Steed, never even bothered to show up at the scene that morning. Believe it or not, one of Kevin's severed feet was never collected, and was left behind on the tracks inside its tennis shoe for nearly 2 days before it was discovered by a civilian. Later that week, Larry Ives and some of his friends were exploring the site and found a large piece of cardboard which appeared to have a blood stain on it. Around that same time period, Curtis Henry found pieces of what appeared to be a gun in the same area. While both of these items would be turned over to a representative of the Arkansas State Police to be examined by the Arkansas State Crime Laboratory, they wound up going missing without explanation. Don and Kevin's bodies were also sent to the State Crime Lab to be examined by the Arkansas State Medical Examiner, Dr. Fahmy Malek, and he was soon ruled that their deaths were accidental. According to Dr. Malek, the two boys had both passed out on the tracks because they were under the quote-unquote psychedelic influence of THC after having smoked the equivalent of 20 marijuana cigarettes, which left them in such a deep sleep that they were unable to hear the oncoming train. Well, needless to say, the victims' families had a hard time accepting this ruling. While there were witnesses who reported having seen the boys smoke marijuana in the hours prior to their deaths, and 2 grams of weed were found in the pocket of Kevin's pants, it seemed very unlikely they could have smoked up to 20 joints. Curtis Henry maintained that Don was completely lucid when he stopped by their home after midnight, and since the noise level produced by the train reached a volume as loud as 98 decibels, it was not believable that both boys could have been stoned enough to lie down on the tracks in virtually identical positions and sleep through the entire thing. Furthermore, since Don always took good care of his hunting rifle, Curtis was skeptical that his son would have risked scratching it by lying the rifle down on the gravel. There were also concerning eyewitness reports from that night of an unidentified man dressed in camouflage military fatigues who had been seen walking down a road located less than 200 yards from the spot where the boys' bodies were discovered. 1 week earlier, Danny Allen, an officer from the Bryant Police Department, had received reports of a suspicious-looking man in military fatigues in the same vicinity. Allen came across this man walking down the road and pulled over to question him, but without warning, the man pulled out a gun and fired a shot through the patrol car's blue light before running away. Allen was not harmed and organized a search of the area for this man, but he was never located, and there was speculation that he might somehow be connected to the deaths of Don and Kevin. The Ives and Henry families would hire their own private investigator to work on the case for 5 months, but he kept getting stonewalled and running into resistance from all the investigating agencies. Finally, in February of 1988, the two families decided to hold their own press conference in order to express their personal frustration about how the case was being handled, and the story would run statewide in newspapers and on television. This strategy seemed to pay off, as Linda Ives was soon contacted by Richard Garrett, the newly appointed deputy prosecuting attorney of Saline County. Garrett expressed an interest in re-examining the case and decided to hold a public 3-day prosecutor's hearing at the Saline County Courthouse in front of 7th Judicial District Circuit Judge John Cole, where testimony would be heard from a number of key witnesses and new evidence would be presented.
I hope you enjoyed that preview of The Boys on the Tracks from Robin Warder and The Trail Went Cold. And if you'd like to listen to the whole story, be sure to subscribe to The Trail Went Cold and listen to episodes 213 and 214 about The Boys on the Tracks. You can find them at the website trailwentcold.com or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you like the show, you'll have over 460 episodes to binge. Thanks for listening.